Everybody, a very warm welcome to this joint TCM PMA webinar focusing on a very important topic for a wide number of organisations, and that's about how we can tackle bullying and harassment in the workplace. My name's David Little. I'm the CEO and the founder of the TCM Group, and I'm also fortunate enough to be the founding president of the Professional Mediators Association. And I've been working in the area of conflict and conflict management for some 25 years or so now. And I've seen firsthand the damaging and destructive elements of bullying on all parties involved, obviously on the person alleging that they're being bullied, but also on the bully themselves, and more widely on the team, the organisation, and across the whole structure of the business within which the people are working. It's a challenging issue, it's a difficult issue, it's an issue that brings about strong feelings, it's a very emotive issue, it's a very hard to define topic. And my experience of working with bullying and harassment is that we've become very reliant on policies and procedures as a tool in an attempt to try and resolve these issues. And my experience generally, whilst policies and procedures do have an important place, an important role to play, my experience has been that policies and procedures often exacerbate matters, that they inflame situations, that they actually can become more divisive and more damaging. And in actual fact, the policies that are often in place to try and resolve these issues unconsciously and unwittingly often actually make them worse. Well, as a mediator, my experience of mediation is when people are given the opportunity, often in difficult cases, emotive, as I've said, challenging, distressing situations, when they're given the opportunity to come together and have a dialogue, to talk and to listen, with a skilled mediator managing that process, helping the parties to have a conversation with each other that's based on empathy, compassion, humility, recognition and understanding. In those conversations, people start to gain insights and recognition of the impact of their behaviour, of the real cost of their behaviour. And in so doing, the mediation process offers people a chance to change, an opportunity to transform their behaviours, recognising that their language, their behaviours are having a negative impact. They can then choose to behave differently. Wow, what an impact it has. And it, for me, is the most incredible way of driving change. My first experience of tackling bullying was actually in schools. I set up a program called the Conflict Resolution in Schools program, CRISP, in the 1990s. And I went into schools, very tough schools sometimes around Leicestershire, helping them to embed the principles of empathy and understanding and dialogue, often in very difficult situations, working with youngsters who are at risk of exclusion or who are involved in negative and sometimes quite damaging behaviours in the playground and in the classroom. And I saw firsthand the role that peer mediation could play in schools in creating a safe, constructive, non-violent environment for young people to be able to resolve their issues. I took that experience and learning into organisations, and for the last 15 years I've been working with a wider variety of organisations to help them think differently about conflict and bullying in the workplace, based on the principles of cooperative problem solving, dialogue building, consensus building. Now, these aren't some fluffy terms that only work in the cases that, well, you know, the case isn't that serious, or the issues aren't that challenging, or the parties aren't that hurt. No. Mediation works in cases which are incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging, where the parties are stood staring into the precipice of doom. They've got nowhere to turn to, no one to speak to. It's in those cases that mediation has the most powerful, transformative impact. So today's webinar is a fantastic opportunity to listen to a wide variety and a wide array of different speakers talking about their experiences of conflict and mediation within the workplace. It's a webinar that's being run jointly between the TCM Group and the Professional Mediators Association, a fantastic pairing of two incredibly passionate bodies promoting best practice in mediation and dispute resolution across the UK and on an international basis. This webinar will last for 60 minutes, we hope. We're going to try and ensure we get all the speakers. The first time we've done this, by the way. So we've got lots of people speaking from all over the UK. So let's hope the technology works for us. I'll introduce them shortly. The webinar is being recorded, and it will also be transcribed and posted online as a YouTube video, but also as a white paper. There'll be a couple of polls through the session, so you'll be able to interact with us, and there are opportunities to ask questions. You should see in the console in front of you, you've got a box called questions. It's very simple. Type your question in there and we will do our very best to answer it for you. If you have a particular question for a particular individual, again, we will try and get that question to the right person. So I'm just looking in the question console. I can see a number of you are having problems with the sound. I hope you're it's sounding a bit better. So Jane, Emily, are you still? Is there still the echo? Be interested to hear. Lauren, you've said that's better, so hopefully the sound is okay. Louise, you've asked a question. How would you like to deal with situations where relationships broke down and staff are unwilling to engage in mediation? Very important. How do we get a commitment to sit in a room with the other person when every fibre in our body is saying, please, please, please don't put me in a room with this person. It's only going to make matters worse. You don't understand how horrible and terrible the situation is. How can we get that person to go from that position to what I call the golden grunt? Okay, I'll give it a go. The golden grunt, the most powerful sound in mediation, the golden grunt. I'll give it a go. Because when the parties are willing to give it a go and demonstrate the courage that it takes to sit in a room with the other person, amazing things can happen. So yes, Louise, we will definitely cover that topic. And thank you to everybody who's coming back and saying that the sound is now better. That is great, and that's really good news. Ken, you've asked if you're muted. Everyone is muted on the webinar. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of us talking. But for those of you who are presenting, we'll obviously unmute you. So for those of you who are interested as well, we will provide a free copy of the TCM Model Resolution Policy for everyone who's in attendance. That policy is in use in a wide array of organisations. In fact, Lloyds Banking Group have just promoted the work they've been doing to introduce a resolution policy, halved the number of bullying cases in Lloyds Bank in the last 4 years, with savings of millions of pounds, quote unquote. Very significant change. So sit back, enjoy, relax. It's the last day of the week. It's Friday. The weekend's nearly there. Do enjoy the webinar. And of course, we're all over social media. There are the links and the clicks that you can follow. Okay, so a little bit about TCM. A number of you will have worked with us in the past, no doubt, to use our services to deliver training services or mediation services. And of course, a number of you will have used us as consultants to help you develop the cultural change and create the conditions where dialogue is possible. Our emphasis, our passion at TCM is on protecting relationships while securing lasting and sustainable outcomes. Those two factors are not diametrically opposed. In fact, when we build lasting relationships which are predicated on respect, dignity, fairness, actually we see that drive in productivity, performance and business growth. Those two things are not diametrically opposed. The Professional Mediators Association, Gemma, we've got Gemma, our coordinator from the Professional Mediators Association. We'll hear a bit from Gemma later on. And the PMA is a fantastic body. It's the body for mediators in the UK, and it develops a wide array and offers a wide array of amazing services to our members. Practice standards, continuing professional development. There's an incredible accreditation scheme which is really taking off now. It's been in place for a year now. And of course the National Mediation Awards, which are running this October, the 5th year of the National Mediation Awards, celebrating the work of the unsung hero of the modern workplace, the mediator. So our running order for the webinar, we have Owen Bubbers and Giles McNair sat ready and primed to offer their inputs and their insights from their work as mediators in the UK. Gloria Lloyd, Managing Consultant, is going to talk about her experience of working with leaders to address issues of leadership and management capability on tackling issues and giving confidence to managers and leaders to tackle bullying in the workplace. Delighted to have two speakers from Royal Mail Group talking about the work that they've been doing, Thomas Quavey and Paul Taylor, to promote mediation in bullying and harassment cases within Royal Mail Group. We've been working with Royal Mail now for 2 years, and that is an organisation who are passionate about mediation and the impact it can have. We have a great speaker talking about whole systems approaches and organisational embedding and integrating bullying approaches within the organisation, Matab Khan. He's going to share some of his insights and experiences of some big companies he's worked with to promote anti-bullying best practice. Bill Forrester and Andrew Rundle both mediators. One's an internal mediator at Kent County Council, another's a professional consultant mediator. They're going to talk about their experiences, and I'll top and tail the session at the very end and try and offer a few thoughts as well, just in terms of some of that. So wow, we've got a lot to cover in the next hour, so I best crack on. Okay, so the first poll, I'd like to just check in with you. Are you using mediation right now to tackle bullying in the workplace? So I'm going to launch the poll. Do you use mediation to tackle bullying in the workplace? Yes, no, or if you're not sure, unsure. So we've got 120, we had about 250 people registered for this webinar. Of those, 120, right, that's a massive webinar, really excellent turnout. So 119 people. Do you use mediation to resolve bullying and harassment allegations in your organisations? So I'll keep the poll open for another 5 seconds. That's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to close it now. If you've not voted, I'm afraid you've missed the opportunity. So just close that poll, and I will share the results. So fantastic. So 63% of you are using mediation within your organisations. That's really incredible, and it's just demonstrating, I think, to all of us that mediation is playing a more and more important and integral role in tackling conflict and bullying in the workplace. And I hope for those of you who are using mediation, today's webinar will build on that. 29% of you still to be persuaded, perhaps not using mediation yet. I hope today you'll get some good quality information that will help you make the decision about moving towards a mediated approach. 9% not sure. Be interesting to hear what the blocks are. Is it not clear in your policies and procedures? So for the 9% of you who aren't sure, then hopefully we will be able to give you more information on making that a more visible approach within your organisations. Thank you. That's a nice little starter. So a very, very clear message that mediation is something that a number of you are using and are benefiting from. And here's why. Here we go. Look at them fighting, screaming, shouting. They're not listening. They're not talking. Both of these people are involved in the kind of feuds and quarrels and disagreements that we're all familiar with across our organisations. In fact, many of us would argue, and I would argue myself, that this kind of conflict, when it's managed well, can be very effective and creative and innovative. But my experience is that when it starts to go bad, and these two people turn around to each other and start calling each other bullies, that they start using more negative and pejorative terms to describe each other, that they reach for the nearest tool to help them resolve the issue, which is a procedure, a policy, a mechanism to resolve the issue. And what that does is it actually creates and perpetuates a very binary position between our two parties. I'm right, you're wrong, I win, you lose, you're a bully, who do you think you are? I'll see you in court. And that behaviour locks us in, that fight or flight response locks us in. And what happens is we start to see the dispute as almost a game, not a game like we might think of as chess or a nice game of tennis, but it's a game that starts to play out between ourselves. It's about I need to win, you need to lose. And of course what we start to perceive is the other person's going to attack us, and the best form of defence is attack. So what we see is that the conflict escalates very quickly. Right, wrong, win, lose, attack and defend. And unfortunately in a great many organisations that we work with, the response to bullying in the workplace is woefully inadequate. 63% of you using mediation, fantastic. We will celebrate that. I don't think that necessarily reflects the UK organisational context. Because a lot of organisations, they do nothing, they bury their head in the sand, or they have a policy or a procedure which actually antagonises the situation and formalises it. And the impact on the individuals is massive. You know, let's go and talk to people and hear what they're saying about the cost of conflict to them within their organisations. Stress, anxiety, fear, worry, loss of control. Let's be honest, you cannot resolve an issue of bullying in the workplace watching Homes Under the Hammer. And unfortunately, that's the response that many of us are left with no choice. We need to remove ourselves from the situation. Days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years. And how difficult it is then to resolve these issues where these two valuable, important members of our team need to come back into the workplace. And those people who are at home, this is like a broken record. They wake up in the morning thinking about it. They go to bed at night thinking about it. It's all they think about. They're not sleeping properly. There's something on the news today about the impact of insomnia. The biggest cause of insomnia that I find is a broken relationship in the workplace. I see people haggard, tired, bad backs, irritable bowels, sore necks, sore shoulders. The physiological and psychological harm is damaging and destructive, but we can't resolve it watching homes under the hammer. The biggest implication I see is a breakdown in trust. I'm sure we'll hear from some of our mediators about this. I know one of our talkers is going to talk about rebuilding trust. But the first thing that goes flying out of the window is trust. The second thing that follows trust very closely is communication. The third thing that goes flying out of the window, chasing trust and the breakdown in communication, is common sense. And what we need in tackling bullying, what we need in addressing this issue properly, is to focus on rebuilding trust, creating a bridge of communication and bringing common sense back into the room. And unfortunately, again, when I work with organisations, we seem to do more to get in the way of these things and damage trust and get in the way and interfere with common sense than we do to actually deliver an approach which is predicated on common sense dialogue and trust and rebuilding trust. Why, I hear you ask, why do we do it? Because we're afraid. We're scared, we're worried that we're going to be dragged through an employment tribunal and we're going to be held to account for a failure to act. So we fearfully fill our logs. We fearfully and with anxiety complete our audit trails. We do all the things that our lawyers tell us we have to do, but no one is saying to us, get in a room and sort it out. That's what we should be doing. Get in a room and sort it out. Because this is what's happening to your money right now today. It's going washing down the drain. The cost of these issues is incredible. It's eye-watering, but it's often a hidden cost. And one of the challenges that I set for many organisations is to put in place a diagnostic and a mechanism to understand the true cost of conflict, to build a business case. And when they go to the board with this, wow, eyes open wide. Is this what's really going on in our business? And of course, introducing mediation and a program of mediation drives real savings and real cost benefits. So just in summary from me, and I'm going to hand over to our first guest speaker in a moment. Our first speaker is Owen and Giles. But there are approaches to bullying and harassment, as I see them, not for 63% of you who use mediation, I hasten to add, but on a general term, they're reactive. You have to go nuclear. They're intrinsically adversarial. They polarise the parties. They rarely get to the heart of a conflict. They're superficial and deal simply with the behaviours, not the needs, the goals, the hopes, the fears, the aspirations that the parties have. They're ignoring what's really going on for your people and for your business. They impede creativity and innovation. And the kind of cultures sometimes that we see in teams or businesses is just, it's sad. Blame, grievance, entitlement, fear, or litigation, or all of them. Okay, that's it for me to get the session started. I'm going to hand over to two of my colleagues, Owen Bubbers and Giles McNair. They're going to share with you some of their perceptions as professional mediators, and these are guys that are out there doing it all the time, so they've got a lot of very valuable information. So I'm very excited about listening to Giles and Owen. Now, each of the speakers have been given 5 minutes. Now, 5 minutes goes very quickly, but if I could ask the speakers, please do try to stay within your 5 minutes. That would be most helpful. So over to yourselves. I'm handing this screen over to Giles and Owen, and you've now got control of the screen, guys, and I'm going to mute myself and you'll need to unmute yourselves so people can hear you. Owen and Giles, I can't hear you, and I'm getting a lot of messages saying that people can't hear you. I think your microphone might be muted. So sorry, everyone. I can see a lot of messages coming through. Giles and Owen, you need to unmute your microphone, and people can't hear you at the moment. So apologies, everyone. I did think the multiple speakers might throw up a few technical issues, and here's our first technical issue. So let's see if we can get them back on sound. So guys, just to say, you need to unmute your microphone as soon as possible.
Okay,
hello.
Everyone. I apologize to everyone. Hope you can hear us. I was just going off on one about how to create a safe space, but let me take it right back there. So why does mediation work? Well, as practitioners in the field, for us, it's really about helping parties to identify, what their needs are and how do we actually benefit them. So a lot of formal processes are very kind of structured step by step, but rarely get those needs met. Now, of course, mediation can't guarantee or promise that we will help them get those needs met, but we facilitate the opportunity for them to kind of walk through that door, if you will. But how do we do that? Anyone who's mediated a case like this will know that getting people through the door is incredibly difficult. People feel vulnerable, they feel scared, and deep down, yes, they probably feel a mixture of humiliation, isolation, even shame when it comes to something like bullying. Think back to the schoolyard when you're 6 years old. Most of us have had our fair share of knocks and scrapes. A lot of memories come bubbling up to the surface often that we find. So how do we bring them back in? Well, there's numerous things, but in particular, creating that safe space for someone. So we do that in a variety of ways, including clarifying ground rules, such as respect, courtesy, listening to each other, and speaking from one's own perspective. Also give people permission to take breaks if they need to. They each have their own room that they can go in, take some time out if they need to. And I think this is all underpinned by empathy. What does it feel like to walk in that person's shoes, to have lived with that experience for 5 months, 5 years? They know what it's like to lie awake at night at 3 o'clock in the morning with the dread, a knot of dread in their stomach about what they're going to face the next morning. So empathy is the absolute thing, everything underpins everything to do with the process. Now, there's obviously lots of techniques. I know time is against us, so perhaps we could just focus on a few tips that have really stood out for us as practitioners. For me, one of the key things is don't assume. Don't ever assume. I think particularly for experienced mediators, we need to watch this even more carefully because we may have gone through a similar situation before. But my sense is that the day I feel I've got it sussed is the day I've got it wrong. And actually people think that's easy. And I think it's a real discipline and a real skill. A couple of others as well, I've already touched on the empathy. Now, empathy sounds straightforward, but it takes mental, emotional energy to be present with someone and try and understand where they come from. It's harder if we ourselves are stressed. Maybe certain triggers are setting us off that we can relate to the situations we're seeing in front of us. So I think being very self-aware, being reflective and regularly checking in with oneself. If you in particular have experienced certain things around bullying and harassment yourself, very, very important. You can't necessarily stop those emotions that you're feeling, but you can be mindful of how they might impact the room. And third, finally, before we hand over to the next speaker, is active listening. Again, so often in the workplace, we're focused on preparing our response. But remember, that person sitting in front of you who is either being accused of being a bully or has said they feel they're being bullied may often have spent months and years without anyone really truly understanding or taking the time to listen in a non-judgmental way. So active listening through body language, through the open questions that you're asking, through the silence that you're holding to help someone just feel, yes, this person is interested in what I have to say, I'm not being judged, and bit by bit that trust and rapport can start to be built. There's no promise or guarantee of the outcome, but you're doing all that you can to create a safe space to deal with a very, very, always a stigma, a very difficult issue to raise for anyone at the best of times, especially in the workplace. So anything else from us before we pass on?
No, I think you've covered it very well there, Owen. I think really, that's exactly agreed entirely.
Okay, so I appreciate there's a lot more we could talk about, but mindful of the time. David, if we hand back to you and the next speakers, unless there's any other questions for us.
I have a question, Giles and Owen. Look, mediation, great. It sounds fantastic. Let's get in the room, be empathetic, be understanding, have that capacity. I get that. I'm a mediator. I get it. But let's be honest. The parties in a dispute, they think this is a bunch of wishy-washy, fluffy, sort of nonsense. They don't get it. They get confused. Is it meditation or is it medication? I mean, what's this all about? How does it work? I'm vulnerable. I'm scared. I'm frightened. Do you basically expect me, in all honesty, to sit down in front of the other person who's betrayed me, who's hurt me, who's caused me sleepless nights? Do you genuinely expect me to be able to sit down in a room with this other person and have the kind of conversation whereby they're going to be open and honest? The best that could happen is they will put on their nice smiley face to you, but behind the scenes, I'm going to take it after the mediation. No, I'm not prepared to go into that room with that person. How do you as mediators ensure that the parties who are vulnerable, who are worried, who are upset, who are scared, at a very base level, because this isn't happening every day, this might not have happened to them for years, it may never have happened to them before, how do you reassure them that the approach is right for them and that they should have that courage to walk into the room? That for me is a really important question. I know it's been asked already. I just wonder what your thoughts are about giving people the courage to do this, to make that first step.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it comes up again and again. Number one, I'll say this: anyone who thinks that mediation or even talking to someone in difficult circumstance is wishy-washy, touchy-feely, all the rest of it, I'd say it takes courage, it takes guts to look that person in the eye. And you know what, you're right. Intuitively you go, well, my experience tells me it won't change because that's been my experience, and that's fine. It's somehow counterintuitive. In terms of courage, you're right. You have to manage expectations because you as a mediator can't guarantee anything. But I'm thinking about, one, take it a step at a time, number one. Two, I think formal process can often be clouded in mystique and uncertainty. Transparency as much as you can about the process, what they're going to be walking into, hypothetical questions about how they might respond, so you're showing that real degree of empathy. But I think one step at a time. Don't ask them to say they walked in through the door. Don't ask to cover the whole day. One step at a time, checking in with them regularly. And ultimately, you know, they want to think about, they've told you they've been in conflict, they've been felt bullying and harassed for 5 years. I'm not hearing what are the alternatives? There are no easy options here. There are only possibly better options. If they've tried a variety of different approaches and they haven't been successful, would it not help to give this a go at least? So it's not a safe option, not an easy option, but it can be the one that leads them to a better outcome if they're willing to engage.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think I'm really looking forward to hearing to our speakers from Royal Mail, because I think what we're talking about there isn't just courage on the part of the individuals concerned, Owen, but I think we're also hearing the need for the organisation to show courage as well, in terms of making mediation and dialogue the preferred route to resolution. And I think there's a real courage for the individuals, but if it feels like it's countercultural and it's already counterintuitive, but if it's also countercultural, then those are major barriers. And I think what I'm hearing you say is it shows real courage on the part of the individuals, but organisations need to be doing more to make this the norm. And that's the point we need to be getting to. So thank you so much for your presentation. Thanks for staying within your 5-minute allocated slot. I know there's a lot more questions coming through. Great question came here through from Ken. Thank you. This is something to be bearing in mind, speakers. You may wish to address this. So a lot of the bullying that's seen in the workplace is subtle and psychological. It's almost difficult to pinpoint with clear evidence. It's usually perpetrated perhaps from a more senior position, so the recipients feel powerless. I'd love for us to be able to touch on that. So speakers, if we can think about the notion of powerlessness, loss of control, and the more subtle behaviours that we see, and how as mediators we work with those. But for now, Giles and Owen, thank you. And I'm going to hand over now to Gloria. Gloria I met a number of years ago when I was training mediators in Transport for London and London Underground. Gloria is a managing consultant and works with leaders to promote best practice for leaders. So Gloria, I'm going to hand over to you now and hand the screen to you. You'll need to unmute yourself in the same way that Owen and Giles did, and hopefully we should be able to hear from Gloria. So let me just make sure that has handed over.
Okay, let me just check. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you fantastically well, Gloria. Thank you. It's great to speak to you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well. Thank you very much. I loved the slide that Owen and Giles. If you would like to put that slide back up, that would be really good. I thought that was a really lovely slide that you had there. I don't actually have any slides. It'd be nice to have that one back up as I'm talking. So I've been asked to talk today about some examples that I was sharing with David about leaders in organisations in terms of recognising and changes that they wanted to make in terms of bullying. But in terms of my thoughts are, in terms of the high-level organisational perspective, is having a strong HR policy set, and particularly obviously the bullying and harassment policy, that you have a strong policy in place so everybody knows what the definition of bullying is, and that is best practice, so that definition is in alignment with ACAS recommendations. Now, as in the run-up to this webinar, we were looking at the ACAS characteristics of bullying as offensive, intimidating, malicious or insulting behaviour, and abuse or misuse of power through means that undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. They're really, really important and powerful aspects that having them in as part of your policy means that everybody knows what the definition is and where the starting point is of what is and isn't bullying in that sense. An example of this being having a bullying and harassment policy in place, and therefore then having training and briefings for leaders in the organisation of how to recognise bullying and bullying across teams or in teams. And an example where a leader recognised that some of the things that he was doing and as assuming that they were his leadership style, just part of his leadership style, and then coming forward and saying, actually, I would like some coaching. I think that my style has been bordering on bullying and I need to make changes, and can I have some help? And that that recognition, that change that can happen when a person starts to realise that actually, I think what I thought was quite acceptable is not actually acceptable. So that's a starting point there in terms of leaders being able to understand and recognise that. And obviously that was quite an overt reaction in terms of coming forward and making changes. And then the changes that occurred for him in his team in terms of communications in his team, and how he created a greater emotional intelligence almost in his team, in the way that that change impacted him, but also impacted how people reacted to him. So trust and respect and humility, lots of the words that we use, that we hear being used in mediation, being part of a process outside of needing to go into mediation. And the bottom line actually of the difference that made to the performance of the team, of how people connected together and how they were then able to work together and to grow together as a team. The other side of that being that people not understanding what is the definition of bullying, so not being able to define for somebody that feels that they are being bullied. But actually another example that I gave to David, which I will share, was of how there was an accusation of bullying and a formal process showed that actually the examples that were given were not bullying in that formal process, but that the leader had a pace-setting style of the way that he was leading the team was very fast-paced and was different culturally to what they were used to. And the coming out of that process, then how they as a team worked together and built up their relationship together, because obviously he then had gone through a process of being formally investigated in terms of being a bully. And in the coaching sessions that I did with that person, how we talked about the choices, the humility that he needed, and the strength and the courage to go back to a team where there'd been issues, and forgiveness, and how he needed to then to build upon that. So they're just some thoughts and some examples that that I've been involved in. Many more than that, but they're just a couple that I've been involved in terms of the outside of and the actual mediation process.
Gloria, thank you so much for that. And I think, you know, I'm getting a lot of questions coming through the session now is in relation to both the policy framework and also leadership. If you had a leader sat with you now who was really struggling, particularly in the case you talked about, Gloria, where perhaps it was seen to be sort of tough management action, it wasn't bullying, what would be your sort of top tip to a manager or a leader in terms of how they manage their employees, how they develop their teams in an assertive, often hard-headed way, but also that it's not interpreted by employees as being bullying? Is there anything that you think managers and leaders can be doing practically to ensure that their management is perceived in a more constructive way?
Yeah, I think there's a number of answers to that, and I think they will take more than a couple of minutes, but I think that's probably an hour all by itself. But I think understanding the policy, both the leaders and the staff understanding what the content of that policy is. So, you know, what is and what isn't bullying is very, very important. But in terms of moving forward with assertiveness in managing people, you know, in culturally in the different you know, if you've come in and you've got a different style to what people are used to, is just communication, the ability to sit down as a team and work out how you're going to move forward in with the opportunity for everybody to give their views and their thoughts, so that there is understanding. You know, seek first to understand. I think Stephen Covey's statement that he uses, seek first to understand, is very, very important. And then that actually just sometimes prevents issues moving forward, where people do have the opportunity to talk and you act on what you hear and move forward. You know, you can still get to high performance, but not necessarily with hard-hitting approaches.
Absolutely. I've read many management books along the way, and for me, Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits are still, for me, the number one in terms of helping develop effective management capability. And you're absolutely right to refer to that, Gloria, in what you just said. Thank you so much. I think, Ken, you've come in, you've offered 3 words, Ken: humility, empathy and communication. And let's not forget, these are not nice to have in our organizations. And what I think Gloria is saying there aren't just about nice management practices. This is about delivering real business benefit and real business value. I go back to the earlier point. The impact of bullying is destructive, it's divisive, it's pernicious, it's damaging. It causes people to leave your business, to disengage and to step away from what they're there to do in the first place. You know, let's remind ourselves, in Mid-Staff's hospital, Robert Francis walked into that hospital and found that people were dying because of unreported issues within that trust as a direct result of a fear of a culture of bullying. If I raise my head above the ground. And for those of you who haven't read the report, it's worth reading that report, and subsequently the Freedom to Speak Up review that was published last February about promoting a culture within the NHS where people speak up and are able to speak up. And for me, there's a real problem within our organisations, and it stems from the policy frameworks that exist. Now, someone's asked the question, and thank you very much for the question. I can't remember who it was that asked it, but you know, is there not a requirement to sort of follow a statutory procedure when it comes to harassment? And there's a real fear is, what are these statutory instruments? What are these statutory procedures? When I go into organisations and I ask this question, it's a really important question. How many bullying allegations have you investigated that have resulted in punitive sanction being taken against your manager as a result? Generally, it's less than 10%. Some organisations, it's down into single figures. And what I say to those organisations, so what you're saying to 98, 99% of your workforce is they're liars, that they're experiencing bullying and they're lying. No, we're not. It's like, well, actually, you're taking them through a process, you're investigating it, your manager's offering mitigation, there's no punitive sanction. The vast majority of your employees, therefore, what's the point of bringing a case? What's the point of putting my head above the parapet? And the failure of organisational leadership isn't just about management, it's the leadership at the highest levels. And as I would say, in any boardroom that I walk into to help them change the way they think about conflict, you get the behaviours you deserve. And the policy framework, the systems, the process, the culture is designed by the organisation. And the problem is it's deeply adversarial. And we don't want to have that adversarial approach within our organisation, because it prevents people from speaking out, it prevents people from having the courage to step up and resolve their issues. And this is a really important point for within organisations. We can't just tackle this issue of bullying and harassment by putting our managers through a sheep dip training called bullying and harassment training. That's not going to work. There has to be soul searching, and it's not just about having a policy that meets the minimum standards set out by ACAS. That's not going to work either. They're woefully inadequate. We need to look at our values, our systems, our processes, our culture. How do we do business? So there's lots of challenges being set out there, Gloria, but I'd like to hand over now to Royal Mail Group. They've been doing some fantastically progressive work around tackling bullying and harassment in the workplace. And I'm going to hand back, Giles, to yourself, and you're, as I understand it, going to run the slides for Paul Taylor and Thomas Quavey. So Giles, I'm handing back to you now, and you'll need to unmute Paul, or I can do it, and hopefully you can also run his slides. Was it Paul?
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Hi, Paul.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I've just got a one-way sound now, I think, which is, so I'm just going to press on and I'll try and dial back in. I think we're defeated by the technology. I'm not actually sure whether Thomas is able to join either, but I just want to quickly set some context around Royal Mail and the use of mediation. So early in 2014, Royal Mail and the CWU, that's our Communication Workers Union, reached a groundbreaking agreement that was called Agenda for Growth. Within the agreement, it was recognised that industrial stability was key to the future success of the company. It's worth remembering that in 2001, over half the working days lost in this country were due to strikes attributable to postal workers. And between 2000 and 2009, almost 1 million working days were lost to industrial action at Royal Mail. So it was recognised by Dave Ward, who was the CWU Deputy General Secretary at the time of the 2014 agreement, that the postal workers' enemy was no longer Royal Mail management. It was other delivery companies like DHL, TNT, DPD, Amazon and so on. Dave Ward said that the enemy was now outside the gate. The use of mediation was contained within that 2014 agreement, and it was the first time that mediation had been considered as an alternative dispute resolution tool within Royal Mail. It was and remains key that Royal Mail and the CWU work together to nip issues in the bud and use mediation to do that. So in the summer of 2014, the CWU and Royal Mail jointly recruited 10 full-time mediators from within the organisation. And the current team has 5 mediators who came from a CWU, a union background, and 5 mediators with a Royal Mail management background. When mediating industrial disputes, they co-mediate together, 1 CWU and 1 manager mediator, and that reinforces that complete impartiality that we strive for in mediation. At the same time as dealing in the IR space, Royal Mail were revising some of its HR policies and again agreed with the unions the use of voluntary mediation as part of the bullying harassment process. Just want to draw a distinction here between bullying, harassment and grievances in Royal Mail. So in general terms, bullying harassment in Royal Mail refers to unwanted behaviours by an individual that make another individual feel either intimidated, degraded or humiliated, for example. We have a separate process and policy for what we call grievances, and I'll come back to that towards the end. In Royal Mail, we operate a shared services HR model, and it's through that central function that B&H claims are initially made. And when a complainant contacts the shared service, and I don't like really to talk about levels of bullying and harassment, but currently within Royal Mail, I guess if the complaint is something that could lead to a dismissal against the respondent, or it's related to protected characteristics such as sexism or racism, then we do follow the formal process. Anything of a lower level, mediation will be offered to both the complainant and the respondent. And that has to be the right thing to do, because one of the issues that I have with the formal process is that the first thing we do is we stop the parties involved from talking to each other. We then go through a lengthy and expensive process that's very stressful for the parties and expensive for the business. As David's already said, the formal process is inherently adversarial, We end up with a winner and a loser who will occasionally end up back in the same office working together, or a dismissal that could lead to another lengthy process, including the potential for an employment tribunal. So where appropriate, we do offer voluntary mediation to both complainant and respondent. And initially that was carried out for us solely by the TCM group. We've now we've got the mediator capability and resource, started to bring that back in-house. But the success rate of over 95% of these people reaching agreements in a mediation has exceeded all expectations. Our formal process has an in-house target of over 35 days from complaint to conclusion, and that's often exceeded. Whereas with mediation, from the moment we received the complaint to get into an agreement, it's 7 days. So we're doing it in 20% of the time. Parties become less entrenched in their positions. There's less stress, less sick leave. And at the end of the mediation, the parties hopefully skip off into the sunset singing Kumbaya. Even if they don't do that, mediation has created the conditions for a dialogue between them and helps them take the first steps on a journey back to trust. And I know, again, David covered that a little bit earlier on. When we look at costs, purely financial, because the benefits, as I've started to describe there, are significant in using mediation in the B&H place. But from a financial perspective, mediation takes a day. Cost of one mediation is less than 5% of one formal investigation. So just purely from a business perspective and a financial perspective, it has to make sense. And the impact of mediation has been so positive in both the industrial relations arena and the bullying and harassment process. We are now working with the union to include it in our grievance process. So in Royal Mail, as I said earlier on, I'd cover this. The grievance policy is really where an employee has a genuine concern or a problem or a complaint about their work or employment. So that would be perhaps how they're being treated slightly differently by their manager to everyone else in their team, and that would go down the grievance route. And obviously in a unionised environment, we have to work jointly with them to include that in the process. But given the success we've had in the IR space and the B&H space, I'm anticipating that to be pretty straightforward. Feedback from all the parties involved in bullying and harassment, and I do mean all the parties, has been excellent. And the transition from just working in the industrial relations space to adding bullying and harassment to our mediators portfolio has been a learning curve for our mediators, I think. Whilst we use the same TCM fair model, mediation model in both the IR and B&H, we're finding that the days are different. And probably for me, in the IR space, there's a lot of what I'd call emotional rhetoric, with managers and union reps using emotive words to reinforce their points, and we spend a lot of our time reframing. Whilst there may and probably will be a relationship issue between the parties in an industrial relations mediation, the parties are representing the business or their members. Yeah, for sure they have some skin in the game, but in a B&H mediation, there's less emotional rhetoric and much more genuine emotion. The parties have all of their skin in the game. We've talked about the challenges of actually getting them through the door in the first place. But a B&H mediation truly is just about them, and it's important as mediators that we realise that. So to conclude, I guess, as a mediation team in Royal Mail, we've come a long way in 18 months. Mediation is now recognised as a viable alternative to dispute resolution. And delivering and sustaining this has been a challenge across a workforce of over 130,000 people. We spent the past 18 months telling people why they should use mediation, and our business as a mediation team continues to grow. The business case in Royal Mail is increasingly predicated on the basis that the cost of using mediation is far less than the cost of not doing it. Now, as I said, I've been working fairly mute on that, so if anybody's got any questions in relating to that, then perhaps I could pick those up at the end. And in the meantime, I'm going to dial back in on the phone line. So apologies for any drop-off in technology. Thank you.
Paul, can you hear me, Paul? Paul, can you hear me okay? What a shame. What an amazing presentation. Wow. Compelling. I've known Paul for a number of years now, but it's only recently that Royal Mail have taken over the introduction of mediation as an internal tool rather than my mediators going out to do it. Absolutely incredible. That's an organisation who were well documented and regularly in the news for some of these challenges, are now winning awards and demonstrating the real power of mediation. Absolutely incredible. We've got some great questions, really exciting questions. And clearly the feedback I'm receiving through the chatter area is very positive in relation to the presentations we have. There's one question I want to just tackle, and we're going to be coming to a couple of mediators, and I'd really like it if you could try and tackle this issue yourselves. This is a really important question. When people are perceived to be bullied, sometimes what they want is the other person to be sacked, have their head on a stick. How would you talk them down from that position? When people are perceived to be bullying, sometimes what they want is the other person to be sacked. So what can we do as mediators? That's a really important point. There's a number of questions there about building commitment, managing the process, managing strong emotions. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to our next presenter, Mahtab Khan, who's a bullying expert, and he's worked with a number of organisations to introduce mediation schemes. And Mahtab, I'm running your slides for you at my end, so I'm going to unmute you. So if everyone could just bear with me while I unmute Mahtab. If you want to introduce yourself, and then your slides should appear on the screen in a moment. Let me just track you down and unmute you. Mahtab, are you there?
That's brilliant. Should we do a quick sound check? Are we okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. So I'm going to mute myself, Mahtab. If you want to introduce yourself, your slides will appear on the screen in just a moment. But if you wanted to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to put your slides up.
I will do. That's brilliant. What I'll do is I'll give you prompts from when I need the slides to move on as well. So the first one up first, please. My name's Mahtab Khan. I've been mediating for a few years now. Got experience in industrial relations for over 30 years. And I sit on employment tribunals, which is the court of law to which employees can take employers over, of course, unfair dismissal, redundancy, and, of course, some discrimination cases. What I've done is I've just plucked out two scenarios, two specific instances where, on the one hand, what I was asked to do was to undertake an investigation. That was in the context of a local authority. And the other was a mediation, and that was in the context of health service, what used to be known as a primary care trust. And what I'll do is I'll go through each of those slides, bearing in mind some of the questions that have been raised during the session already. So the last question that was raised was, okay, I want this person, because of the way that they've been behaving with me, I want them hung, drawn and quartered. I want them to lose their job, and I want everyone to know what a bad person they are. So I'm getting the drift of what you're saying here. And often what you're doing is that you understand that issue of position and interest. You'll understand those words, and sometimes you can understand why it is that the person that's saying that is coming from that position. And what you're often doing is that reality check with them. Well, let's get real about this. You have a job, the other person has a job, your livelihoods are at stake. You may want that, but how realistic is it that it's going to happen? Don't you want more that the behavior should stop? Isn't that what you actually want? And your way of seeing it currently is that the person should be hung, drawn and quartered or lose their job. Next slide, please, if we may. So what we'll do is that we'll have a look at one of the cases initially. And the first one we're going to start off with is the investigation. Absolutely right, and what our post office colleague was talking about, really expensive, really time consuming, often goes over time scale. So if you've got a 30-day time limit, for example, it's going to take you 45 days. Pick the Christmas periods, Easter periods, summer months, you're actually talking about 2 to 3 months really. So there's an issue there about the way that organizations think that they can tackle these issues through the investigation process, and then the reality check again. What happened in this case, the one that I'm talking about, and this was a local authority, was that we did have someone, and I've purposely put those emotive words in there, who was displaying clever, cunning, manipulative and underhand behaviours, and also showed those in the investigation. It was interesting that he happened also to be a trade union representative. And remember, there are protections for trade union representatives, and he always wanted to lever those into his own case. What he was actually doing was that he was going to the computer of someone that he managed, And he was changing dates of her meetings in ways where she was then going to look really quite foolish, either turning up late to a meeting or turning up to a meeting that wasn't existing. And that wasn't the only form of behaviour. There were other ways in which he was speaking to her, delegating her work, ignoring her. But he was clever about the way that he did it. So he nearly always ensured that there weren't witnesses about. What's interesting in today's world, of course, is computer forensics and how it is that you can tap what someone has done on their keyboard. And what he wanted us to do was to prove that it was his fingers that touched the keyboard. He would want that because he was in regulatory services. And of course, the way that they work is that they work to a burden of proof in law, which is beyond reasonable doubt. I think he forgot that actually, when the case, should the case go to disciplinary, they're going to be looking at it on balance of probability. Is it likely or is it not likely that he had done these things? And then would make their decision based on this. Mindful of time, if we move on to the next slide. And this was a case within the National Health Service. Forgive me if I don't name the area in which it happened. And this was interesting because within the health service, not just here in the UK, but overseas as well, we've done some work in Pakistan over at Imran Khan's Cancer Hospital in Lahore. And what you find are status issues quite often coming to the fore. So if you're a medic, you are listened to. If you're a non-medic, administrative staff perhaps on occasions, you are listened to, but actually you don't have the clout that a medic has. What was interesting here, and this was a high security hospital in which people who had been accused of and convicted for on occasions murder, for example, there were people who were self-harming, there were a whole range of patients. And the small issue, really small, and I describe it in that way, was that when patients were being told about what the next step with them was going to be, this particular medic would share it with them first and then the staff team later. And the issue for the staff team and the person that raised the complaint was one of him feeling undermined. And he felt that this was happening on purpose. But as you say, when they were brave enough to be in the room at the same time, it didn't take really very long for them to understand that what was actually happening was a lack of communication. And if they could speak to each other, and if they could make time to speak to each other, actually what would happen is that one party would be able to brief the other, that's the medic briefing the admin and the managerial staff, and they need to know because they need to make arrangements for the patient depending on the decision of the medic. So all they did was to draw a line under what had happened in the past and to change the system around. In fact, they went further than that because they started talking about briefing other managers and other staff who may be feeling undermined because that's the feeling that they were feeling by not being briefed in the first place. And they did dance off into the sunset on this occasion, singing, I think it was Kumbaya. Next slide, please. The bigger thing that this has turned into for us in Change Agency, the consultancy for which I work, is that we're now beginning to work on issues of bullying, and we're talking about bullying in schools, and we're talking about bullying in the streets. So recently, a mediation training course that we had put on, one of the participants was someone who works with guns and gangs here in the West Midlands. And the issue in these sorts of cases is that quite often someone who sees the perpetrator in action either wants to report it and is too scared, and we're now talking about to the police. We're talking along the continuum a lot further around hate crime. The issue here is that perpetrators of these sorts of acts, their first port of call usually is denial. So we've gone over the spectrum of harassment and bullying in the workplace. We're now talking about what may be a criminal offence. The debate often is whether it's a criminal incident or whether it's a hate crime, a crime. Hoping I've covered some of the areas, mindful of time. David, perhaps you could put your mic on again if there's any questions, happy to answer.
Matab, that is fabulous. Thank you. They're really great, three great examples. And what I really liked about that was the fact that this approach isn't just based in our organisations as a societal element to what we're doing here. And when we look at, I think the organisations who see their approach in a more holistic way, tackling bullying in the workplace, but it also impacts on people at home. I talked at a conference about the relationship between bullying in work and domestic violence. You talked there about the issue around street crime, gangs and hate crime in communities. And I think businesses who address issues of bullying and harassment effectively within their organisations actually do find out that they're tapping into a wholesale change in the way that we perceive justice within society. I think you've touched on some very interesting points, Matal. I found that very, very useful. Thank you.
Welcome.
So we're coming up to time. I'm conscious that we've got a couple of mediators. We've got an internal mediator and an external mediator consultant. And we've had one question, a really excellent question, Louise. You're asking, if there's a situation of a breakdown of trust, are employees wary when internal mediators are engaged? So Matal, if I'm going to mute you again, just bear with me if I can. I'm going to hand over to two of our delegates who are on the session and see what they have to say in relation to the issue of trust in the mediator. So bear with me whilst I get that organised, and I'll hand over to them in a second. So Bill Forrester and Andrew Ruttle. So my tongue will cue again. Andrew Ruttle. So Andrew, are you there? And Bill Forrester, are you there? So Bill Forrester. Bill, can you hear me? Bill, I've unmuted you. Can you speak, and we could just test that the sound's working okay? No, I can't hear you, Bill. And let me just see if I can hand over to Andrew Rundle. And Andrew, I'm going to hand over this to you. And Andrew, if you unmute yourself, can we hear you? Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the webinar. If you want to just unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. You've got a couple of minutes, Andrew. Just be very interested to hear some of your experiences as a mediator at Arundel Mediation Solutions and the work that you've been conscious of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the question you asked about internal versus external, I think it's very important that you can engage people and give them that trust. So sometimes an external mediator does provide that. From the organisation's point of view, it's important to build up resilience with your own ways to handle conflict. So, but I think there is a strong argument to say it is always useful to have somebody from outside coming in sometimes, because it does ensure impartiality and it does give trust to the people who are involved. The second thing I would say was just to follow up on the point you made about, you know, people want punishment for perpetrators of bullying. It's very important to try and keep people future focused, to say what is possible, and that mediation is not part of any internal process linked to discipline or grievance. It is a separate process. So what the outcomes of what you're going through with the individuals isn't going to directly impact upon those. So it's important to keep that context and perspective in terms of what mediation is and what it isn't, and how it can influence. But certainly the experiences I've had recently, the role of the mediator in terms of giving people trust, even the way that they organise the meeting itself and the way people are positioned and sitting, will provide them with confidence. And just one final point to say as well, I mean, Owen mentioned about the importance of empathy, and I would totally agree with that. And you've got to be careful as a mediator not to slip from empathy to sympathy.
Great point to remember. This is not about tea and sympathy, is it, Andrew? This is about having a tough conversation where we listen to each other, engage. And what people often say to me when I'm mediating, I sometimes take people out, shadowing me, and they say, wow, the conversations in mediation are the most powerful conversations that I've ever seen. And one of the things I think, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, is what do you think we do as mediators to help people move away from that tea and sympathy, or that they hide themselves, they don't talk, they're not being open? Is there anything that you do, or that in particular, that you think creates the conditions for these much more powerful conversations to happen?
I think one of the techniques that I use is to talk about the options that are available to them if they don't go down that mediation route. To say, well, you know, if you look 6 months hence, you're in that organisation, you're in that office with that individual, if you haven't resolved this in a mediation situation, and you've gone down, as we've talked about, whether a process where there are winners and losers,
yeah,
that nothing's going to change. You've got to tackle it head on. You've got to be open to change, but certainly by exploring those options, it does help to focus people on what is possible. And as you mentioned at the very start, common sense is key to often coming out with a solution.
Andrew, thank you so much. So it was brief, but it's great to hear from you. Really good to hear a professional perspective here as well. So thank you, and wish you a very happy weekend. So thank you. We're coming to the end of the session now. So I want to begin to wrap up. So I'm just going to take Matab's screen off. So bear with me while I put mine back on. Okay, so we're looking good. Coming to the end of the seminar now. So we've had a number of guest speakers. What a fantastic webinar. What a fantastic opportunity to hear from an array of people in relation to this tough issue. Now, as an organisation, you may have heard me say this, but the grievance procedure and bullying harassment procedures, in my view, are what causes a lot of problem. The best thing we can do with a grievance procedure is shred it and use it for bedding for small furry animals. It's the only really valuable thing that could happen with a grievance procedure. What's he saying? I hear you say. What don't ACAS require us to have a minimum standard on discipline and grievance? Look, if you're interested in seeing an innovative, progressive approach to dispute resolution that's being embedded in a number of organisations now, large and small, called a resolution policy rather than a grievance procedure, I am happy to provide that free of charge to anyone on this webinar. Let me know, it's yours. You can have a free copy of that, because that's what it's about. It's about the language, the vernacular, the behaviours, the culture, the systems and the processes. We cannot address bullying by just pulling one of those levers. We have to do all of them together. And that's how we drive real change within our organisation. So let's wrap up. A number of you are still on the session. It's great that you're still there. We've got 190. We've only lost 10 people, and I'm conscious we've gone over time. So apologies to you for that. So would you consider, based on what you've heard, would you consider now extending the use of mediation within your organisation? For those of you who are already using it, would you like to see it used more widely? For those of you not using it, do you think now's the time to be introducing mediation within your organisation? So the poll is open. We have over 50% voted. I'm going to keep the poll open now for another 5 seconds. That's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you haven't voted now, I'm afraid you've missed a chance. Don't worry, there's another poll coming up. Brexit's just around the corner, or the Brexit poll's just around the corner, I should say. But this one isn't quite as dramatic perhaps as Brexit, but what a response. 97% of people on this webinar would like to see an enhanced use of the role for mediation within your organisations. Well, that absolutely is telling. And it's showing that people are convinced that common sense, dialogue, talking and listening is the right way forward. So the PMA and TCM have joined forces. We're working more closely than we've ever done. And we're working together for a good reason. We're promoting best practice in mediation. So how can we help? Well, if you're interested in providing some support in a case that's on your desk now, contact me. We will provide a priority and discrete service in any cases where you think a mediation scheme might be beneficial. We set up mediation schemes like the Royal Mail Group, Lloyds Banking Group, masses and massive organisations, over 300 organisations. We have set up mediation schemes. If you would like to set up a mediation scheme or extend your mediation scheme, talk to us. We're here to help. We are experts at embedding mediation into your organisation. We run a fantastic one-day course simply called Tackling Bullying and Harassment at Work. If you want to hear about best practice and drive, this isn't about sheep dipping people through your organisation. This is about driving real change within your organisation. We can come in and train 2 people. We can come in and train 200 people. We understand the economic pressures you're all under at the moment. We will find a solution that works for you, but that is a fantastic course. We run accredited mediator training courses. If you'd like to be a mediator, like Andrew, like Paul and others, and you'd like to drive the changes in your business, we run accredited mediation training. We run open access courses as well as in-house courses. We run conflict audits and diagnostics. How much is all of this costing us? We can tell you that. But we also provide management and leadership training, because let's be honest, if we can deal with these issues upstream, then perhaps there'll be less need for us to have all of these mechanisms downstream in a reactive way. Leaders 2020, watch this space. TCM's big leadership program, Leaders 2020, being launched on June the 23rd, Leaders 2020. A few words about the PMA as well. So from the 1st of April, which is today, this is not an April Fool's joke, this is real. We are offering free associate membership of the PMA. We will be waiving all fees to join the PMA. There'll still be the accredited mediator standard and also corporate membership, but if you'd like to join the PMA as an associate member, the fee was £50. We've slashed that to £0. Anyone can become a member of the PMA, giving you full access to the wide range of services provided by the PMA. Free membership. Simply log on to the website, put your application in, you will become an associate member of the PMA for a period of 3 years for free. You can become an accredited PMA member by completing an approved accredited course, such as the ones TCM offers. And also we're reducing the price for corporate membership. We want to see more corporate members stating clearly they support mediation. Come on, join the PMA, be part of this movement which is driving better dispute resolution. The PMA delivers a suite of CPD events and activities, and also the National Mediation Awards. Nominations are now open. Get your nominations in. Previous winners, Lloyds Bank, Marks and Spencer's, Royal Mail Group, of course. No wonder with the amazing feedback that we've heard from Paul and the team at Royal Mail. So final thoughts for me. Be radical. There really has never been a better time to apply a new approach. I would suggest that the old-fashioned systems and processes are no longer fit for purpose. They've failed systematically to resolve these issues. It's time for change. It's time to talk. Gather evidence and build the business case. What's the evidence in your business? What's the need? Calculate and evaluate the real need going on for your people, for your organisation. Don't just bolt on or graft on a bullying policy. It doesn't work. It needs to involve everyone and work across all of your systems. Empathy is key. The ability to, as we've heard from presentation, to put yourself in the other person's shoes is vital. Where are your safe spaces? In your bullying and harassment policy, your grievance procedure, do you have safe spaces for people to resolve these issues? Is mediation providing that safe space? Constantly seeking out opportunities to talk and listen. Unblock the barriers. Get the parties in a room. Get them in a room. Keep getting them in a room. Keep them to, it's the only way to resolve our disputes. Any other form of dispute resolution is simply a sticking plaster or abrogation. The only true way to resolve these issues is to get in a room and talk it out. So actively encourage cooperative problem solving as a cultural norm. And strong feelings are okay. It's okay to feel angry, fed up, frustrated. They're the F word of the modern business, feelings. They're okay. Let's work with them. Let's not pretend they don't exist, because they're being suppressed right now in your organizations and in your employees' stomachs, causing stomach ulcers. Ensure your values are enshrined in your policies and leadership competencies. I never walk into an organization's foyer and see the value statement: betrayal, harm, dogma, vitriol, and angst. I see respect, dignity, excellence, engagement as being the core values. Well, they're not being played out in some of the policies that are driving these changes. There needs to be a link and convergence between policies and values. Our policies are written from a level of risk aversion, and unfortunately, I know there's a number of lawyers on this webinar. With the greatest of respect, the only people who benefit from a risk-averse business context are lawyers and their P&L. No, your employees do not benefit from risk aversion. So let's be less risk averse. Let's get in a room and talk it out. So let's train our managers and leaders to be effective listeners, and let's keep reviewing and measuring what are we doing and is it working. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for participating. Sorry we've gone over on time, but I did think, as I was doing the running order this morning, that's a lot of people to squeeze into a 1-hour webinar, but it's been recorded. We'll send out the link to everybody so you'll be able to hear it. Like I said, it'll also be written up as a white paper. So thank you very much for staying with the webinar and for being here today. So I'd like to wish you a very, very happy weekend. Thank you, Gemma, for organising it all today, and thank you to all of the members of the PMA and all of TCM's customers for making all of this possible. And of course, a massive thank you to all of our speakers. You've been incredible, inspiring, and have given us a lot of food for thought. So thank you again, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.